Hello everybody, this is International Master Jesse Cry, and today I would like to talk about a difficult endgame involving checkmating an opponent with two knights. Now, checkmating an opponent with two knights is not possible normally unless the opponent gives us some help. However, if the opponent has a pawn, it turns out we can use this pawn against him to checkmate the black king. Now, some might think this is a rather obscure endgame, but it's definitely happened in tournament play. But the main reason it interests me is that it teaches how to play with the coordination of two knights, much the same way that the bishop and knight checkmate will teach a player to use certain patterns with the bishop and knight, which will then recur throughout the game, both in the opening, the middle game, and in the end game. So this is not only to know how to do something that might happen in tournament practice, but it really is also the attempt to try to learn how to play with the coordination of two knights. Okay, so first I want to say this is rather difficult. It took me some time to figure this out myself, but I'm hoping through the medium of video that I can explain it. I've read about it in books, and I never really got what they were saying, primarily because they were talking in terms of variations. I would like to hopefully just try to break this down in terms of general concepts. Let's begin. Now, the first thing that White's going to want to do here, in a position like this, is the first step is going to be to get the black king out of the center, the immediate center. And there's more than one way to do this. Let's just begin with, say, king f3, king d3, knight f2, king d4, king e2, king c4, king e3. We're inching our way forward, king d5, knight d3. Okay, so now black is going to be forced to leave the immediate center and has to play a move like king c4. Okay, so now step two, we're going to have to move now the king away from what's called the extended center, and we see this in the bishop and knight checkmate as well. So king e4, king c3, knight e5. There, we've done it. The king will now have to leave the extended center. So what we've seen so far, just in this the first two steps, is that White is going to have to rely on just his king and his knight to checkmate the black, or not checkmate, but to corral the black king. What happens is if White moves the knight on g4, the pawn starts to push, and we'll see later that we need that pawn, and we need its ability to move in order to checkmate black. So the trick about this corralling the king is now we just have to do it with the king and the knight, whereas in the bishop and knight checkmate we have an extra bishop to help us push him to the side of the board. Okay, obviously black can do several different things here. I'm just going to try to follow the most tenacious line of defense for him. So king b4, king d5, and now he could play either king c3 or king b5. What I want to notice, the listener to notice here, is that after king b5, we're going to play knight d3. And here we have a very useful pattern with the king one square removed from the knight. This is a very useful pattern for shoving the black king back. We take away this square, and we're going to force him either to the side or for him to run to the corner. Similarly, if he plays king c3, king c5 will also form the same pattern, and black will have the same problem. Okay, so let's take a look at king b5, knight d3. King b6, knight b4. Now, like I said, the way I've done this is that you could look this up on a computer program. Probably could do this, or other variations can do it. What I tried to do in learning this is just to establish a couple basic patterns to move the king back. So, for example, here I'm just trying to cut off more squares from the black king. And we'll see I'm trying to set up that same pattern with the king one square removed from the knight. So, for example, king b6, knight d4, king c7. And here, remember, I want that position with the king one square removed from the knight. I play this very weird move, king e6. So the point is now when he looks like he's running, I can then play king d6, getting the same pattern where I'm going to hold one square. Now there might be more optimal ways of pushing the black king back, but what I'm trying to do is just give you a general algorithm on how to do this. So king b7, c5, king c7, knight e6. I'm trying to cut the squares away from the black king. Now here I'm actually going to give two variations, and they represent basically the two different strategies that black can employ once we've pushed him towards the edge of the board. He can either try to hide away in the corner, and that'll be our first variation, or he can run to the other side. So let's take a look at trying to hide in the corner. King d7, king b5, king a7, now knight c5, cutting away the b7 square. King b8, king c6, king c8, knight b7, cutting the d8 square. He has to play king b8, knight d6, cutting the c8 square. King a7, king b5, king b8, king b6. Now, I really believe that in order to master this, you should really try to do the bishop and knight checkmate first. And one of the reasons for that is this pattern, along with some others we've already seen occur in that. And that is simply that once we get the king locked into the corner like this, where you can only go back and forth, we're in a much easier position to manipulate what's happening. So here, for example, it's kind of easy now. Now, king a8, for example, let's say knight e5, g4, knight d7, g3, knight b5, g2, knight c7, checkmate. Okay, let's go back to the position. Let's see what would happen now if he runs towards the king's side. With king d7. Now, you can imagine that this can all happen on the other side of the board as well. He could have tried to hide in this corner, and he could have also tried to run this way. What we're going to find is when he runs towards his own pawn, then the blockading knight starts to make itself felt. And we see, for example, he already controls some critical squares. He controls f6, e5, and h6. And those are going to be critical in the mating patterns we can use. Okay, so king d5, king e7. Knight c5, cutting the square. King f7. Knight e4. So, why knight e4? What I found is when he runs to the king side, just in a practical sense, I find it very annoying if he can get up to h5. Because if he does that, it's going to be harder to flush him out, and a lot of times he can run out this way, and that's just incredibly annoying. So the first thing I want to do is make sure that that does not happen. The way I'm talking about this, I'm not talking about it in terms of some kind of perfect analysis. I'm talking about this in a practical way in terms of how this can actually happen and also how you can practice it. Okay, so knight g3, stopping the h5 escape. King f7, king d6. King e8, knight e4. King f7. Now I'm going to take away and do something interesting. I'm going to play knight ef6. So that does two things. It takes away that square, and it takes away that square. King g6, king e6. King g7, knight h5. King g6, knight g3. So it's very much like the bishop and knight checkmate, where I'm slowly edging him in. King g7, king e7. King g6, king f8. And now we see how this knight is working for us, and that both of those knights are controlling a lot of squares now for the black king to escape. So the game could continue. King h7, king f7, king h8, knight f6, g4, knight h5, g3, knight f4, g2, knight g6, checkmate. For those of you who've done the bishop and knight checkmate, you probably have the experience that someone showed you the bishop and knight checkmate, and it seemed easy, and then when you did it, it seemed very hard. I have a feeling it'll be the case with this endgame as well. What I encourage you to do is to review this lecture maybe several times, and then definitely try to practice it with a friend. Remember, the key idea is not so much that it's going to happen in a tournament game, but that you're learning how pieces coordinate in what could be called a simple endgame. By simple endgame, I don't mean something that's easy, I just mean something with a limited number of pieces on the board. And all the great world champions have always made their way in chess through being able to play simple positions very well. And this is one of the key exercises that can help you do that. So this is International Master Jesse Kraai, hoping you've enjoyed this arduous checkmate of the black king with two knights against a pawn. And I just want to say one thing at the very end. There's a number of rules in terms of when it's workable and when it's not, but the general rule of thumb that you can use is that if you've blockaded the pawn from passing over the frontier line, passing over into the white's fourth rank or black's fifth rank, depending on which color you are, then it's generally a win. Now, the pawn can also be advanced, and you can still win in certain situations. So what I would suggest is even if the pawn gets further, say it gets to the fourth rank, you can oftentimes still win if your opponent doesn't play well. We saw in a number of these checkmates that we were able to checkmate before the pawn got to the other side of the board. Even if he gets a queen, we can still land checkmate. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this. Bye-bye.